Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. There was a time when the Maharajas were revered and the people practically worshipped them. I have seen myself when I was a kid. The persons of my parents' generation would go to the statues and touch the feet of the Maharajas who were no longer alive. And yet they have been perceived to be not the paragons, but the evils, lustful, greedy, lost in daydreams, away from the touch. Was it really so? Were they really that bad? Or were they presumed to be so? Are people conditioned to think? And was it because of political reasons? My ancestors have been subject of ridicule. They, along with the other royals, have been vilified, reviled for being spendthrift, lascivious, sexually deranged, exploitative. In fact, every adjective the so-called liberals and Democrats could think of was applied to them. Conveniently forgotten was the fact that their subjects were happy, that the people got justice almost instantly, that art and literature prospered, that genius were rewarded and encouraged. Look at Baba Saheb Ambedkar, a person who from the low set of life, with the financial help from the ruler, became a constitutional pundit. They patronized architecture. They take care of ecology by getting the beautiful verdant gardens. Can you think of the Mughal gardens in Kashmir, the Shalimars, or the Baradari in Patiala without the king? They took care of the people and their needs. And yet, they have been viewed through the stereotypes of elephants, dancing girls, grand palaces. And if you look beyond the bejeweled figures, palaces, opulent courts, you will notice something very telling, very effective about India's Maharajas, that they have been largely been scorned and mocked for, are treated with a certain morbid curiosity. And there's a reason for that. The British in their day cast native princes as decadent figures, more interested in frivolous sex, fancy dresses than in governance. And the reason was that they wanted to malign these Maharajas, Nawabs, and the rulers, so that the people would by comparison think that the British rulers were the paragons of honesty, justice, though Clive, Hastings, to begin with, and later on everybody, were the most corrupt people. One white officer, for example, loudly exclaimed, and that's typical for him, that the Maharajas were monstrous and bloated in bulk, hideous and disgusting in appearance, decked with earrings and necklaces like dancing girls. Compared to that white men, who were the figures of authority, but these Maharajas were not manly figures of authority, but they were effeminate and scoundrels at that. So effeminate scoundrels was the way they were perceived. The stereotype held for decades. In 1947, I was a kid of 5, yes. But I saw this magazine when I was maybe 10, 50s to 51. The Life magazine joined the chorus through a statistical exercise, we declared that the average Maharaja had 11 titles, 3 uniforms, 5.8 wives, 12.6 children, 5 palaces, 9.2 elephants, and less than 3.4 Rolls Royce cars. It was all droll and entertaining, even if these numbers were misleading. After all, of this supposed total of 562 states, most were microscopic estates with no political relevance at all. Look at Pataudi, a small village at that time. The Nawab was Nawab in name only. And to lump 600 odd princes ruling over millions with the glorified landlords and aristocrats owning a few square kilometers of real estate not only watered down their status, it reduced them to a caricature. It's just like saying that Queen Elizabeth is a country squire. The fact is that the princely territories spread over 2/5 of the Indian subcontinent and not under direct colonial control, but linked through treaties and agreements with the Raj. These were featured rulers who were anything but the stereotypes of glitter and parade. And life acknowledged in that 1947 write-up that Cochin Maharaja was more likely to be found bent over a Sanskrit manuscript than laying his head in the lap of a concubine. And as life acknowledged, the facts are that Gondal's prince was a trained doctor. He was a prince. So was my dad. My dad was among the first few to do his MD. And the bigger states were not ruled by tin pot dictators, drowning in wine and orgies, but by serious political figures who saw their kingdoms as legitimate political spaces, whether it was Hyderabad, whether it was Kashmir, whether it was Bhopal. Of course, the charge of the princely eccentricities has some truth, I don't deny it. One Maharaja saw a Scottish regiment and immediately dressed his brown soldiers in kilts and pink ties. Another is said to have been believed that he was Louis XIV reborn among Punjabis. But India's princes hardly had a monopoly over such idioms and crazes. Look at the British monarchs. They just had colorful past like these princes had. Prince Henry had 8 wives. Henry VIII. Even men like Lord Curzon. And Curzon was, the most stuffiest viceroys sent to India. And they had, in fact, for Curzon, once placed Tannic stark-necked. Whenever he would play tennis, he would be stark-necked. But no history records it. But if a Maharaja had a number of wives, that became the subject of discussion, ridicule. So the image of Maharajas as self-centered fools then not only misses the most interesting story, most useful story, but actively conceals it. Now look at the great work done by the Maharajas. I have talked of the gardens and the architecture. I have talked of the arts and the literature growing. But the Maharaja of Mysore in southern India had elephants, but agreed. But he had a governance system that was obsessed with industrialization. And the way Mysore was industrialized, apart from architecture, is something which was beyond the ken of the most capable administrators of the world at that time. Baroda. So that is in the south. I come to Baroda. The Maharaja allocated $5 to every 55 of his subjects for education as compared to $5 for 1,000 people in British India. So the British were spending for every 1,000 people $5 for the education. Baroda was spending $5 for every 55 people. 55 and 1,000. Make a comparison who was more socially useful to the people. And yet they were bad. But that's not enough. Go down. In Mysore, when the vaccination was a problem, 3 queens of Mysore, though they were queens, they were not supposed to go in public. They decided to spread the positive message of vaccination. And their story debates back to sometime around 1805. One was Queen Devajamani. And she became a model for a vaccine. Can you imagine a queen modeling? Can you imagine, for example, Queen Elizabeth modeling for vaccine? You'll be horrified. You'll say, how can Queen do it? But she did it. And she was doing it to understand the urgency with which the government wanted to vaccinate the Indian public. So the British and the Indian officers were engaged in long and arduous battle with the public. Public was unwilling to be inoculated. So get over this resistance. The queen, 3 queens of them, came forward for the good of the subjects. And these queens and the princes, we call them bad. Travancore Cochin, it's in Kerala now, was celebrated as a model state for investment in schools. Imagine it. Infrastructure, schools, education, infrastructure, that's what we need today even. And that was a model state. Indeed, it was in princely territories that the earliest discussion on constitutionalism took off in India. These rulers encouraged constitution formation. So why is it that we only talk of harems and flashy cars and sex scandals when we think of the princes? The reasons. It was extremely convenient for the Britishers to present colonial officials as well-meaning, upright nannies, struggling to discipline a band of spoiled brown children, to acknowledge that the brown men could be capable of governance as these princes were, would beat the British at their so-called empire game mission to civilize. How could you civilize people who were more civilized than you are? So they said, okay, look at your rulers and look at us. We are lily white. The story of this insult or demonization of the princes plays down to paranoia. There was some paranoia and fragility that defined the Raj. Though the princes were formally pillars of the empire, they were sort of pillars. In practice, they were restless partners and they were always testing their overlords. Baroda, again, was the source of revolutionary anti-British literature, and it was printed under innocent titles, vegetable medicines. Mysore could not tolerate the press going after the royal family. Immediately, you could say the royal family, you are punished. But you could say the Raj, British Raj, and the government won't care for it. They'll turn the eyes somewhere else. So they were more nationalistic. Jaipur rulers agreed. They filed their accounts. They concealed millions in revenue so that they could not pay higher tribute. But the multiple rulers were there in India who provided financial support to Nationalist Congress. As a matter of fact, When Congress was fighting for independence, the main money was coming from these princes. And this is not talked about. Curzon in 1920s wrote in short note, Lord Curzon, and he said that these princes were Philip Iglesias. Philip Iglesias was the Bourbon prince who supported the French Revolution. And Curzon in that note says that these princes have ardent sympathy for the so-called nationalist cause. And then we call these princes bad, sex maniacs, inhuman, and so on. It's odd enough to even think of that much of the freedom struggle, the princes were actually seen as heroes. Krishna Raja Wadiyar III of Mysore, for example, was deprived of the power for misgovernment in allegation that the British Governor General soon realized was unfair. So they'll cook up the stories. Look at the way Maharani Jhansi, Rani of Jhansi popularly called, was not allowed to adopt a child so that they could grab her kingdom. So the achievements of the bigger states basically brought pride to the nationalists. Even Mahatma Gandhi himself acknowledged that. And they were dismantling the racist trope that the natives could not rule themselves. Whether it was Patiala or whether it was Travancore, Baroda or Bhopal, majority of these states were much better governed than the British India was. But they will not talk about that. By 1930s and 40s, the situation changed. In many small states, often due to their success in widening access to education, demands emerged for democratic representation. And it was there, but then that was opposed by the rulers. Of course, self-interest was there. But coming to education, do you know that, for example, Mahindra College Patiala was established in embryo much before the first college in North India, that's Government College and Ferguson College in Lahore. They were later on. The poor reputation of the princes was settled with today. Definitely has some truth, but 80% of that is the result of typecasting, suppressing facts, not letting facts. I talked about the vaccination. I talked about Baroda's. Actually, I'll be talking about in another comment or write an article how the first act of defiance after 1857 was by Baroda, okay, who practically snubbed the king and the viceroy and rubbed their noses in the dust. The British could not tolerate it. So, a colonial stereotype was formulated. But if the history gives us any lesson, it is that everything is more complex than it appears. That reality is not what it is supposed to be. Reality is something more. And this is true of the Maharajas also, among whom the deaf modernists, shrewd politicians tried to hide. And the detail was too long hidden behind the stark, stale talk of the dancing girls and elephants. The reality of this fact is that these much maligned, misunderstood Maharajas were in the vanguard of progress, good governance, honesty, no corruption, instant justice to the people, and education. Of course, they had their failings. Who doesn't have? But to dub all the princes for all the times is a height of injustice, and the Britishers perpetrated it, and the local third-rate politicians carried on the tail for their nefarious ends. Thank you.